Charles Leclerc's Monaco curse. Sometimes it strikes for something out of its control, sometimes it for something within its control, but we are all familiar with it. And given that Monaco is coming up this weekend, a race that, as a Leclerc fan, I look forward to it, but I also simultaneously dread. I feel it's an appropriate topic to speak about, and the various ways in which it struck through the years. We start in Monaco 2017, when an at the time 19-year-old Charles Leclerc, who hadn't quite run away with the F2 title yet, I mean it was the third weekend of the season after all, was heading into his first time racing at him. He started the weekend great by taking pole position with a very raggedy lap, by the way. Like, how did he manage to get pole with that lap? It's beyond me, honestly. But he also managed to keep the lead of the race at the race start in the feature race, the first race of the weekend, and that's always a nice way to start a race, and especially at Monaco where overtaking is notoriously difficult. This is F2, but, you know, overtaking still being difficult. With it being F2 and Monaco, of course there was safety cars. Safety cars are an inevitability in Monaco with F2. I mean, come on, it's F2. And it was the second safety car of the afternoon that was the real undoing of Leclerc's race. Now, he didn't react to the first safety car, but instead pitted under the second one. And then, according to his column he did on motorsport.com at the time, got stuck hitting the safety car and then reacted too slowly to the green light that was there to signal to him to pass the safety car or whatever. But look, that wasn't the real problems. The real issues came when it appeared that the left front tyre wasn't attached properly, which resulted in him having to head back to the pit lane and truly ruining any chances he had of scoring anything meaningful, or even finishing the race because he retired. It was apparently the camber shims that had broken. He said on motorsport.com, it was the camber shims that broke. I didn't hit the wall in the race or anything, but we think the detail was fragile and, while the pit stop was a normal one, the shock of removing a tyre and fitting a new one could have been sufficient for the failure. Now, the why F2 worked at the time was that the feature race was on the Saturday, with the grid being set with, like, normally from qualifying for that, and then on Sunday morning was the sprint race, and the grid for that was set by the result of the feature race with the top 8 reversed. So having retired in the feature race, it meant that Leclerc would be starting at the back for the sprint. Not ideal. Nor was it very ideal when he and Norman Nato collided when he was trying to pass the Frenchman in the sprint, ending his race. He had overtaken 3 cars prior to that, so that's something, but in the end nothing, because it was a double retirement for Leclerc that weekend. He did still lead the championship afterwards though. On to 2018 and up into Formula 1 for his first F1 Grand Prix at him. Leclerc would qualify in 14th place in his Sauber, and the race would be relatively uneventful for the Monegasque. Until we got to the closing stages, that is, where Brendan Hartley, who had been running just ahead of Leclerc around about lap 70-71 mark, had been told that Leclerc was reporting some issues. Right before he collided into the back of him as his brakes gave out, heading into the Nouvelle Chicane, ending both of their races. 3 races deep at Monaco now, and still not a single finish. He was classified in 2018 because he did complete over 90% of the race distance, but he didn't finish. And it didn't get any better in 2019. In fact, I'd argue it got worse. Heading into the closing minutes of Q1, Leclerc was sat in P7 in the order, and Ferrari had opted against sending him out again for a second run. A bit risky given they're in P7, but they opted against sending him out for a second run in a bid to try and save tyres. You can see the sense. And even though a lot of folk did improve their times, which knocked Leclerc right down to the cusp of making it through in P15, that would have paid off. If come the very end of the session, his own teammate Sebastian Vettel hadn't have gone quickest from P17, knocking Leclerc down into P16 and out in Q1. This inevitably meant that he had his work cut out from come race day because, well, starting P16 in Monaco, not the easiest place to overtake, but to be fair to Charles, if I'm not mistaken, he had the only on-track overtakes after lap 1 that race. But after making a move on Norris at the Lowe's hairpin and also overtaking Grosjean at Rascasse, a move that I will say kind of reminds me of Yankees' overtake on Kobayashi there in 2014. Leclerc did try and go for another move at Rascasse, and this time it was on Nico Hülkenberg. However, this time it did not quite work out as he clipped the barrier, giving him a puncture, which 1, sent him right to the back and a lap down, 2, damaged his floor, and 3, pulled out the safety car so the marshal could clean up the debris. Not too many laps after this, then he would call it quits and retire for the race, put an end to a horrible weekend at home, and yet another non-finish at Monaco. F1 wasn't in Monaco in 2020, so we head to 2021 now, where after topping FP2 on Thursday and on Saturday topping Q2, Leclerc would on the first runs of Q3 set the quickest time to tack provisional pole. But during the final runs, he did his best impression of Max Verstappen for 2016 and 2018 by crashing at the swimming pool section. Something that is completely on him, completely his fault on that one, but that ended qualifying, which meant that he had pole position for his home race. And that crash was around about where the good of the weekend ended, because now came the question: was there any damage to the car that would result in a grid penalty and him losing pole position? The answer was no. The gearbox, which was the main concern, was fine. It was fine. He would not need a grid penalty. The left drive shaft, on the other hand, was not, and that did not go detected until he was on his reconnaissance laps to the grid on race day. Why wasn't it detected before when Ferrari were fixing the car? Honestly, fucked if I know. But there was no time to fix it, meaning that Charles didn't even get to start the race this time. And I'm gonna be honest, thinking about how things went in 2022, him not even starting in 2021 ain't quite as painful as 2022, because on to said here, and this time he came into the Monaco Grand Prix off the back of losing the championship lead as his title campaign was starting to unravel a bit. That's something he would have been looking to stop at Monaco and finally just finish his home race to start with, but moreover get a win at home. He'd given himself the best possible chance of doing that in qualifying, where when it mattered, i.e. Q3, he was basically untouchable. Quickest by just under 3/10 after the first runs, he was set again to set the quickest time on the second runs, before Checo crashed and brought out the red flag, meaning he couldn't have finished the lap. Not that it mattered. He had pole for the second consecutive year, a pole he would start from this time. But I will say, that last lap Leclerc was on is one that I wish we could have seen the end of, because before he had to lift off for the red flag coming out, he was some like 6 or 7 tenths up on his own previous best. He was on for like a 10.7 or something. And now, given that the lap record at Monaco was Hamilton's pole time of a 10.1 in 2019, and Charles was on for a time of, what, just over half a second slower than him in cars that were meant to be, what was it, like a 1 to 2 seconds slower or something like that? That's nuts. But come race day, the heavens opened and it was pissing down rain, as we all mind, I'm sure. And at first in the race, things were looking great for Charles. He was leading, it looked great for not very long, because then it stopped raining and started drying up. And Ferrari shat the bed on strategy and somehow managed to turn P1 into P4 after they first boxed Charles in from the wets to the inters. Well, there was a bit of a debate of do you go wets, inters, dries, or do you just hold out and wait for the dries? Thinking about it, Ferrari, if they were going to pull him in for inters, should have done it sooner, or they should have just waited for the dries, because what they did was it was a shambles, quite frankly, where again, they turned P1 to P4 after it all worked out, and after Leclerc had also gotten really pissed off on the radio, and understandably so, when he'd been told to stay out instead of boxing, a little too late when he was already in the pit lane. He ended up finishing in P4 that afternoon, not what he'd have been wanting, but look on the bright side. He had led laps at home, and he had actually finished the Monaco Grand Prix for the first time. So progress. A tiny bit of progress. He also drove a classic Ferrari car. It was one of Niki Lauda's old Ferrari cars at the historic Monaco Grand Prix a couple of weeks before the race weekend, where the brakes gave out into Rascasse. Not even in classic cars is he free for the curse. And finally, we come to last year, 2023, where he'd once again be trying for that elusive home race podium or even win. In qualifying, after all the final runs worked out, he'd found himself sitting in P3 for the start. But he'd also find himself impeding Lando Norris in the tunnel, who he hadn't been told in time was coming up ahead him on a fast lap. Stewards did hand him a penalty, 3 places for that, annoyingly, but he impeded, penalty, whatever. And looking back, that 3-place penalty is what cost him a podium come race day. Because Ocon, who ended up starting P3, did finish P3 behind Alonso, who'd started P2 and finished P2, and Verstappen, who'd won from pole. But that 3-place grid penalty is really where the curse ended for him last year, because despite the rain that kept lashing down later on in the race, he had a blunder and mistake-free race, and finished where he started in P6. For the first time, he had an issue-free race at Monaco. As much as a race at Monaco where the weather gains at 0 to 100 in a matter of laps can be issue free. So, you know, again, progress, I guess. Looking ahead to this weekend though, Look, my hopes and expectations for Leclerc's weekend are at rock bottom, as they always are coming into Monaco, so that at least it might not be so bad when things inevitably go wrong and Ferrari blunders something, or, I don't know, maybe he might make a mistake, or... Although the Ferrari blunders have been lacking this year, I will say. That's a good thing, but it also kind of terrifies me for Monaco. But how do you think the Monaco curse is gonna strike old Charlie boy this year? Let me get your thoughts down in the comments below. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you're new around here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.